All right. Well, thank you, Alisa, for the support, and welcome to the Molchanovs Movement. We're thrilled to be welcoming Goran Colak to the Molchanovs Movement. And for those who don't know Goran, he is a 6 times world record holder, and he has unofficially done an 11 minute 6 second static. And he has done 10 minutes in competition. So welcome, Goran Colak.
Oh, hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
And so the topic of the conversation today is static, which is Goran's specialty. And so I think what a lot of the audience is interested in is, so how do you get good at this? Like, what are the silver bullets or the secrets or magic to getting really, really good at static? Do you have any general thoughts about that?
Well, I guess it's the same as with any discipline. You just need to dedicate some time to it, and you need to be serious about it. And to some degree, I mean, if you really want to excel, if you want to be like top 3 at the world, I guess you need to have some talent behind everything to back it up. But mostly it's training and dedication.
What do you think when you say kind of the talent? What is the physical characteristics that the top static guys have?
Well, I guess is this most similar to if you're running long course. So basically, big lungs and as less muscle mass as possible, because obviously in static you don't need muscles to propel you anywhere because you're not going anywhere. So they're just there to use oxygen, which you don't want. So yeah, I guess the ideal body type would be tall, big lungs, skinny.
Okay.
But I didn't really consider that when I said talent. I mean, they're all talented in some aspects. I mean, if you're talking about freediving, I mean, for me, it was always static was always came easy. That was something that I didn't really train. I was training static the least out of all disciplines. So I was really spending time in my dynamics and equalization and that kind of stuff. Static, I didn't really train. I was just kind of good at it from the beginning.
So what do you think are the cornerstones of a program to train static? Like what are the most important elements for people who want to train static?
Well, first I would say that you need to really decide that you want to train static. Because if you really want to be good at static, not just overall good, if you really want to excel at static as a discipline, then you need to basically ditch all other disciplines. Because static doesn't go with any other discipline really well. I mean, if you're training for pool, then you can kind of do everything. If you're training for depth, you can also do all the disciplines. They're all they're not similar, but they're similar enough to do them all. But if you really want to be really, really good at static, then you will need to aim for that body type that I already mentioned. I mean, skinny and big lungs, which is not really something that you wanna have if you wanna do the big dynamics and especially depth. I mean, you obviously want to have some muscle mass to be able to propel you where you want to go. So you need to make your peace with the fact that you'll not be really, really good at other disciplines. And if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to dedicate time to static only, then I guess that's the most important thing.
Cool. Okay, and then so what is a time frame that you think is necessary to get ready for a static competition, and kind of like what would you be using that time for if you were focused on static as your specialty or the target?
Well, that's kind of hard to say. It depends what you wanted to do and where are you currently. I mean, what's your level currently? So, I mean, if you're really bad and you want to be a world champion, then obviously you'll need a couple of years to achieve that. And if you're kind of good already and you're just preparing for a competition, then I guess, I mean, when I prepare, I mean, the only competition I really train static for is that Fazak competition because of the prizes. So everybody is really motivated to do big static over there. So that's the only time of the year when I train static, literally. I don't train static at all, not any other period. And for that competition, I usually take, what do I take? Like 3 to 5 months of static specific training. So in my case, it's somewhere around that, like 3, 4, 5 months of specific static training in order to get really in shape for static. And I reckon it's kind of similar to other static specialists.
Okay. And like, is there, like, now you know, in our previous conversation, you said that, you know, to train static, you need to do a lot of static. And then you kind of mix it up every once in a while with a different discipline. And actually, I didn't mention this earlier, but you were my coach for over a year, and we did actually some training in static together.
Which you didn't like.
Yeah, like apparently I'm not a static guy. So I guess, so for those people who are watching, if they're looking at getting ready and like they want to do kind of the periodization type training, like what does that look like for static training?
Well, I mean, for static, it's kind of simple, at least mathematically. I mean, you want to have lungs as big as possible to be able to hold as much air as possible. That means as much oxygen as possible. And then you don't want to have elements that are using that oxygen unnecessarily, which are muscles or you being nervous, or whatever it is. So you want to aim for that body type and to have proper tools to be able to do a big breath hold. Then you want to work on your mental part as well, because static is kind of mentally most demanding, let's call it. It's not the fact for everybody, but in general, that's the case, because in all other disciplines, you're kind of doing something, so it's easier to cope with negative sensations once the hard phase kicks in. In static, you just need to stand still and like enjoy it, and it's definitely not enjoyable. So you need to work on the mental part of it, because a lot of time in static you spend suffering. So you need to be ready for that. Obviously, you need to make your peace with it, because there is no such thing as pleasant static breath hold if you're not doing hyperventilating the FRC. On top of that, once you have all that sorted out, that's kind of an easy part. Then you need to train for it. Then you need to elevate your ability to tolerate low O2 and high CO2, which you do with, well, I'm going to say CO2 and O2 tables that I don't really believe in classical sense, but kind of that kind of training structurally. And yeah, then you hope for the best, I guess.
Now, one of the things that you did with me, which I thought was interesting, was we did a fast. I think it was 7 days that we did a fast before just to see how it worked. Would it be something that would work for me as I was getting ready for my competition effort? Do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, fasting for static and why you think that works, and what people can take away from that?
Well, I can mention my own experiment and my own I don't know, findings from that experiment. I mean, I did the biggest experiment I did, and the best one was 10 days fast. So only water, nothing, just water and some electrolytes. I did a control static before I start, and then during that 10-day fast, I didn't do anything, because I also need to mention that before I started that fast, I consulted with Eric Patel. He was the first one that started introducing fasting for big static breath holds. I mean, he experimented with all other disciplines and everything, but mainly it worked for static. So I consulted with him, since he was let's call it the biggest expert in this area for static. He suggested that I shouldn't do any training or big breath holds during the fast. So during the fast, you don't really do anything. You just stay at home being hungry, and you stretch. And that's pretty much it. And also he mentioned one interesting thing, and that is that once you're done with the fast, and once your metabolism is really low, you really have energy and capacity to do just one big breath hold. which was kind of curious for me. I didn't really expect that. I was thinking once you fast, once your metabolism is low, then you just do the static. And it's actually not the case. First, I was suspicious, and then once I finished my fast and I tried my static, it was actually the case. So my first breath hold, I gained 90 seconds on top of my control static 10 days ago. And then next day I tried a breath hold, and that breath hold was actually worse than the controlled breath hold before the fast. So those are my experience from fasting. So I guess if you're doing only one discipline at a big competition, or if you're preparing a record attempt, then it's something that you can experiment with, definitely. But if you're competing at Worlds or at any competition with qualifications and everything, I guess it wouldn't work, especially if you're trying to compete in other disciplines. Then obviously you have no positive effects from fasting. But for static only and for one attempt only, it definitely works. I did a 10-day fast. But to be brutally honest, after 6 or 7 days, I felt better than after 10 days. After 10 days, I was just way too exhausted. So I think it would actually work better with less days, but that's my personal, that's like a case study on one person. So you can't really draw any scientific conclusions from it, but I guess for any individual is going to be a little bit different, but bottom line is that it definitely works.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, like after my 7-day fast, I gained about a minute. I gained about a minute. My contractions were pushed out by a minute as well. So that was quite interesting. Okay. Now, speaking of contractions, actually, I'm sure one of the big questions that people have is how do you train to delay contractions? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on that, to be perfectly honest, is that you don't really need to do that. I mean, why would one delay contractions? It's just basically aimed at prolonging the comfort phase and to feel better during the breath hold, but it doesn't really have any impact in your total static time or dynamic time or depth. So it's just mainly for comfort, which I'm not interested in. I mean, if you're serious about freediving, then your main objective is our results, obviously. So you're interested only in meters and seconds. You're not interested in being comfortable, because there's no such thing as maximum time that's going to be comfortable. I mean, if your dive was lovely and comfortable, then you didn't have a maximum time, and that's a fact. I mean, there is no such thing as maximum activity that's going to be comfortable. Like, choose any activity. If you do it like up to maximum, up to failure, then it's going to be hard at some point. Obviously, it ain't going to be pleasant, and you need to make your peace with it. So, I mean, prolonging the easy phase, I mean, it's always nice when you have a long easy phase. It's better, and you suffer less. But at the end, it doesn't really matter. Your time is going to be the same, I guess.
But okay, so just to play devil's advocate on that, I think one of the thinkings behind trying to delay your contraction is that once your contractions start, you're much more tense, that you would burn more oxygen because I suppose it's traded off by the fact that you go deeper into dive reflex. But I think the theory is that people are less relaxed, so that
there are many things. I mean, we can discuss about it for a long time. But I should go back to what I said at the beginning, the mental part, and the mental part of being able to stay relaxed during the hard phase. That's extremely important. You need to be able to maintain your cool and to be perfectly relaxed even if you're having contractions. And that's really important. People tense up and use more oxygen during contraction because they are not relaxed. They're suffering and fighting the contractions. You just need to let it go. I mean, you chose this sport of freediving, so obviously you'll have contractions, right? There's no such thing as a dive without contractions. So you just make your peace with it. I mean, you're gonna have contractions, and that's what it is. And what can you do? I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's contractions, for God's sake.
Well, I'm glad you can be very blasé about it. So, and that explains why you're world champion. But yeah, I think for most people, they find contractions to be pretty challenging.
It's not that I like them, but I mean, you deal with it. What can you do?
So a couple of questions that have come in. One is that along the what you had mentioned about big lungs and less muscle. And so one person was asking, can you define what you mean by big lungs? Like what is, in terms of, I guess, in terms of capacity, what is big lungs? And, you know, and then proportionately, like, so if you were to look at a 6-foot person, what kind of lung capacity would you be, you know, ideally trying to be? And what kind of weight would you ideally be in order to be a really great static athlete?
Well, can you help me with recalculating those 6 foot into centimeters and meters?
182, let's say.
Okay, 180. Well, for let's say for 180 a male, I would guess. I mean, you have capacity with the capacity without packing and with packing. Let's go with packing. So I would aim 10 plus, 10 liters plus for lung capacity for a male that size. And weight, well, the lower the better. I would say ideally would be, I don't know, 70 kilos or even a little bit less. I'm just popping that numbers in my head, but yeah, I would recommend that would be ideally ideal weight and lung capacity. I mean, in my particular case, when I'm in really good shape for static, like let's say the year when I did 11, I was 72 kilos and I'm 188 centimeters tall, and my lung capacity was 12.5 liters with back.
And how do you get that? Like, obviously there's some genetics in that, but like, how do you get a 10-liter lung capacity?
Well, I guess if you are genetically not gifted, I mean, if you have small lungs, then you have small lungs. What can you do? I mean, it's just what it is. In my case, I always had big lungs. Even at my first spirometry test when I just started. I mean, actually, I had spirometry tests before freediving, but I always had kind of big lung capacity, like normal little capacity. Inhale only was never lower than 7.5 liters. Once I started freediving, it went to 8.7 or 8.9 from all the stretching and packing. And that's the answer to your question. I mean, that's how you increase your lung capacity. Obviously, it's stretching exercises and packing exercises, and packing and stretching combined. Then I was always able to pack a lot. So what is that, from 8.7 to 12.5? That's like 4 liters of packing.
Wow, that's a big pack. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned packing and stretching, and obviously there's been a lot of health concerns around doing that. Is there a safe way to do that, or would you just not I mean, the general recommendation in the freediving world is don't do packing and stretching, but what are you?
Well, the safe way to do it, that you, as with everything, you need to know what you're doing and you need to progress extremely slow. I mean, there is a safe way to do everything. There's a safe way to do depth. If you're going to do depth by yourself with no rope, you're going to probably drown. If you're following the guidelines to depth diving, then you're going to be fine. The same thing goes for everything, including packing and stretching. I mean, you obviously ain't going to be a beginner just learning how to freedive and do packing and stretching exercises. That's advanced technique. That's for somebody who is trying to gain that small amount of time and abilities that he can gain once he's already at the high level. And then you introduce always advanced techniques. So obviously, once you're starting, you stick to the basics. And once you're getting more advanced, you're gonna incorporate more advanced technique. And that's what it is. And as I said, you need to know what you're doing.
Yeah. So a big asterisk on that one for the audience, which is, packing is it can be dangerous. So for those of you who are new to the sport, please, I guess one thing is that please make sure that you have a good instructor, make sure you have a good coach to walk you through how to do that type of exercise safely. Okay, so One question that came in is what is the effects of cardio on static training, like big runs and things like that? Like, I noticed that when I trained with you, my static just completely fell off a cliff when I started doing any cardio. But can you explain why that might be, or some advice for people?
Well, that's only hard to explain. Actually, static is the only discipline where you can do a little bit of cardio and still be kind of fine. Depth is also the case, but mostly for recovery, not for development training. So cardio for recovery, for depth is okay. For static, once you're prepared to in basic period for static, I mean, you can obviously do a bunch of cardio, and then once you go in specific, you'll probably still be fine. Actually, it might be beneficial as well. But during the specific period, you don't really want to do cardio workouts, and for pool freediving, you obviously don't want to do it. The simple answer is because freediving is obviously anaerobic activity, and therefore you want to be as good as possible anaerobically, and you don't need to be aerobically ready. But then again, it's more complicated than that. I mean, in order to be anaerobically ready, you also need to be aerobically ready to sustain the anaerobic training and to be able to recover. So it's kind of deeper than that simple answer. But I guess once you're a beginner, then obviously you want to develop everything. You want to develop your cardio capabilities, your anaerobic capabilities, your technique, your diving flexible, everything. You're developing everything. Once you get higher on the ladder, and once you get closer to the top, then you will also know more. You will know your body better, and you will see what's beneficial for you and what's not. And then you're gonna adjust your training accordingly. That's the most honest answer I can give you generically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So just for the audience, you talked a little bit about the general and the specific, and so do you want to talk a little bit, just to touch on periodization and what the different periods look like and what timing of those look like? It might be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, periodization in sport is same for any sport. I mean, more or less. I mean, different sports have different rules, but in general, it's always the same. You always have this basic period of time when you're developing everything. So you're trying to get your body as good as possible. So you're developing your aerobic, anaerobic capabilities. You're developing strength, repetitive strength. You just develop everything. You just want to be as better physically as possible. And that's usually, let's say, I mean, that's generalizing things, but let's say 60% of time available you're going to spend in your basic training period. And always in your basic training period, you're going to keep a little bit of specific. So you're always going to keep a little bit of that during basic training. Then let's say 30% of time you're going to spend or 35, you're going to spend in the specific, where you're going to be developing things that are specific for the discipline you're going to be competing at. So if you're doing that, you're going to always be doing that. You're going to be doing equalization drills, you're going to be doing technique drills, you're going to be deep diving, and for pool, you're going to be doing pool specific things, and for static specific things. And that's, yeah, like, as I said, 30 to 35% of time that you have available. And then the last 5% or something around that is going to be tapering, where you're just going to be resting and trying to hit that super compensation curve in order to perform as good as possible at your target competition. And that's, in general, that's how it works.
And so can you give us an example of what you would do for specific, and then what your taper would look like?
Well, I mean, let's choose a competition that I'm preparing for.
So for static, let's say you want to do a static competition, and so you entered into the specific period.
Sorry, I think I think my video froze. Can you just repeat? I didn't hear anything.
So if you were to train for a static competition, what would be a typical routine you might follow during the specific period? Like what would a typical training day look like?
Well, specific static for me is actually kind of simple. I keep it as simple as possible because I saw it works for me. I understand it can be really challenging for some people, but for me, it's kind of pleasant. I don't really have problems following that kind of schedule. And for me, that means 6 days of training with 1 rest day. And I do every second day, I do maximum holds. So I'll probably squeeze in anything between 6 to 10 maximum attempts. Sometimes there are FRCs. Sometimes I combine FRCs with full inhale and then full inhale with packing. And sometimes they're just big statics or big bottom crawls or big whatever I feel like doing. But everything is kind of in a static mode. So I don't do dynamics. I do either crawling on a bottom or slow swimming on a surface or static on a rope or normal static or whatever kind of static I do. So I would do that every second day. And in between that, I would do some kind of, well, let's call it CO2 recovery training. So that would be either over-unders or hypoxic swimming or just normal swimming to recover or something in that area. Every now and then I might do just a small tonization just to feel better, basically. I don't think that has any positive or specific effect to my breath hold, but I just feel better. So every now and then I do just slight tonization in the gym, which is not really gym training, it's just kind of a couple of squats and a couple of push-ups.
Okay, and then when you start tapering for static, like, in that period of time, how many statics are you doing? Are you doing anything else?
Well, I during taper phase, I usually stretch a lot and I pack a lot, just to be stretched and be able to inhale and pack as much as possible while build confidence. That's also one of the important aspects of stretching and packing. It's not just to pack as much air as possible, it's to pack that air and still be comfortable. That's the whole idea behind it. I mean, if you pack a lot and you're extremely uncomfortable and tense, that air is just going to hurt you at the end, basically. So you need to be able to pack a lot, but still be comfortable with that air that you're holding. That's extremely important for any discipline, not just static. So I would be doing that, and I would be doing a couple of kind of a longer holds, but my training would be just going to the pool, chilling, relaxing, stretching, and then do one kind of a big hold, and then just go home, basically. And that's I'm going to do that for the last 10 days, let's say. So basically just chill and relax.
Okay, great. We've gotten a couple questions on the macro phases of static. We talked a little bit about, kind of the initial relaxation phase. What is there anything that you're thinking about during the time? Is there any techniques that you're using during the relaxation phase that you think is that people would be interested in hearing?
Well, I switched from different, techniques, let's call them. At the beginning of my career, I would usually be singing a song in my head. Then later on, I was trying to think about nothing, which is not really easy. You always end up thinking about something. And then at the end, I'm usually trying to just visualize like a blank wall with a dot on it, which is kind of weird, but it helps me because you kind of focus your mind on just this blank image with something on it, and you focus your eyes on it, even though there is nothing in your mind, but still. And I kind of try to stay there and just think about nothing, just lose myself in nothingness, let's call it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that when we did a lot of static training. I had that state where I kind of fell asleep a little bit while I was doing my static. And then all of a sudden I was kind of like shocked awake when I was like, wait a second, what's going on? I'm actually still in the water. Is that a desired state, or is that going to be just too much? Is it going to be counterproductive because you lose focus?
Well, it's desired if you're not end up being shocked that you're still in the water. Well, that happened to me a bunch of times as well, especially if you're doing statics later during the day and you're kind of tired, which is in some degree good because you just kind of lose yourself. And as you said, you might even have a sensation of falling asleep. But then often you just pop out and you just like freaking out, what's happening? How long have I been here? I mean, something is wrong, which is not good because obviously you want to tense up and you want to be using oxygen. But if you can just like remain cool and just stay there during the whole time, then it's definitely beneficial. Just lose yourself till the contractions came. And
Okay,
this is
so
why I usually, sorry, this is why I usually advocate statics without a watch or anything, or somebody telling you the time, because then you're not focused on the time. You're not looking at your watch. You're not waiting for your safety to tell you the time. You're just there. You're just holding your breath. That's it.
Hmm. Okay, so now your contractions have started. Do you think of that as one long part of the static, or do you like for me, I initially will have like a contraction, once every 10 seconds, but then as the breath hold goes on, especially past like 2 minutes into my contractions, then all of a sudden they start hitting me like every second, like a jackhammer. Like, what is your experience with that? Like, is it, do you have that, or is it just contraction? Once the contraction starts, that's it till the end?
No, obviously you have at the beginning your contractions are coming in a longer interval, and then as static progresses, the interval is going to be shorter and shorter. So it's same for everybody. I mean, I'm lucky to have really small amount of contractions. Like in the first minute, I'm going to have 6 contractions or something like that, and then it's going to be speeding up. In the last minute, I might have 15 or something like that. But that's still a small amount of contractions. Generally talking about contractions instead. So for me, I count contractions, which is not something that I would recommend. I mean, if it works for you, then definitely go on. But you need to find a method that helps you to relax the most. So whatever that is, can be whatever. There's no right and wrong way to doing static or any other discipline. There's just a way that's beneficial for you, and the ways that are not. So in my case, I'm just counting them, and I usually up to 20. It's not even 20. I don't think about anything. And once I get to 20, I mean, my total maximum contractions number that I can sustain is around 50 when I'm in shape, something like that, plus minus 5. Then up to 20, I don't really think about anything. Then up to 30, I'm thinking about assuming the proper position in the pool, where I am, how I'm going to surface, how do I feel, and all that kind of stuff. And then past 30, if I'm doing facade static, then I'm like getting closer to the surface, and I'm doing normal static. I'm like grabbing the pool edge and position myself in a proper position, and really starting to pay focus on how I feel when I need to surface. And then it's almost over. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that you said to me when we were trained together that always stuck with me. I always repeat this to my students is that you said you can choose between a small, medium, and large samba. Like your ability to be able to determine where you are in the breath hold in terms of your limit is really, really exceptional. So is that just with experience, or are you particularly sensitive about that, or like how does one get good at being able to determine where they are in terms of their hypoxic state?
Well, I wouldn't know, because I only have myself as an example. But I would, if I need to guess, I would guess that everybody can do it if you really listen to your body. This is why I never use stopwatch for static. I just hold my breath as long as I can. And then when I surface, someone's going to tell me the time. I mean, me knowing the time before I surface ain't going to change anything. I'm still able to hold my breath as long as I'm able to hold, and I'm able to dive as long as I'm able to dive. That's it. So I never really think about meters or seconds or whatever. I'm just diving. And someday that can be 7 minutes, someday it can be 11. Dynamics can be 300 meters, it can be 150, or it can be, I don't bother. I just listen to my body. And once I need to surface, I surface. I mean, then you can choose if you want to surface like exactly when you need to surface to be completely fine, and you're going to push a little bit longer to gain 2-3 meters, and then struggle a little bit on a surface. But I think everybody is able to do that. You just need to be honest with yourself. I mean, once you need to surface, you need to surface. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
In depth, it's a bit more tricky, because obviously there's just one way up. So if you need to surface and you're still 20 meters below, and what can you do? But in pool and in statics, there's really no reason to black out. You just need to surface. That's it.
Yeah, no, I get you. There's a few other questions, but actually I want to make sure that we have, we'll hopefully be able to get back to them. I want to make sure that we have some time to talk about a couple of other things which are a little bit more on the fringes of freediving. One, you've mentioned the facade competition a couple of times. I think that is a really interesting competition. Can you tell us a little bit about that competition and what it's like to be a part of it?
Well, it's organized by the next Sheikh of Dubai, and his nickname is Fazza. So this is why those competitions are called Fazza competitions. And they have a bunch of them, not just for freediving. It's cultural heritage. So all the activities that they were doing before, modern Dubai and modern Emirates, they cherish. So you have freediving, you have falconry, you have camels race, you have shooting, you have a bunch of things that are native to that area. And freediving is there because before they find oil, they were diving for pearls. So this is why they have freediving as well. And they were diving for pearls in a way that they would have a rope connected to the bottom, and they would drag themselves by that rope to submerge. Let's say kind of similar to a free immersion dive. And that's how Fazza static looks like. I mean, you have a rope that's in the pool that's 5 meters deep. You're not allowed to use any equipment, so basically just speedos, not basically, but literally just speedos. And you just need to stay under the surface. So you can hold that rope to a meter depth, or you can go to the bottom of the pool, you can do whatever you want, just need to stay under the surface of the water for as long as you can. And that's how it looks like. It's kind of stressful because the prices are kind of big and everybody is extremely motivated. I know that it's a fun fact that they have a shooting competition, like Olympic shooting, as they have at Olympics. And when people come there, they say that the competition in Dubai is usually much harder than competition at Olympics because everybody comes there to win money. And it's the same in freediving. I mean, it's a lot of money for freediving. Even though that amount of money that was spent among freedivers, it's basically nothing compared to other Fazza competitions. Like I think in falconry they have close to €500,000 plus a Bentley, which is a lot of money. So us getting a Range Rover is basically nothing. But for freedivers, obviously, that's
yeah, it's the biggest competition, freediving related competition in the world. So so how many Range Rovers have you won as a result of the Fazza competition?
I think it's 5. I'm not sure. I think it's 5, and then I had a couple of cars for second place as well.
And my understanding is there's like car dealers that are standing by to basically purchase the car from you as soon as you win it. So obviously, so you can take the money home as opposed to the car. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the whole Dubai change as the world is changing and everything is degrading. Dubai is in that basket as well. I mean, before, during the golden era of Dubai, just people had so much money, and they would just throw money at you. There was no trouble of selling the car or getting as much money as you want for the car. Just people were everywhere trying to buy cars from you, and it's much simpler than in Europe, I guess. There's no lawyers, there's no paper saying, man, they just give you the money, you give them the keys. That's pretty much it. It's kind of weird. In the middle of the desert, this guy shows up with money, and there's a weird situation years ago. But nowadays it's different. And last year or two, they actually don't give cars anyway. There's just a fraction of money that was given before. So yeah, the golden era passed.
Yeah, you're mentioning that they've downgraded the prizes pretty significantly.
Yeah.
And so
I mean, they're still big for freediving. Let's not mistake that. But yeah, compared to what it was, it's not that anymore.
Yeah, and so the Fazza competition ended like 4 weeks ago. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that particular particular competition? I think when I talked to you earlier, you said that you had messed up. But what does that mean for you in terms of? I mean, you still got second place, I think.
No, I was third. I lost second place for 2.5 seconds or something like that. And last year I lost first place for 3 seconds. So yeah, having this nice stroke of luck in Dubai. That was by far the worst competition I had, and my worst time and my worst placement out of 11 years of them competing there. I was always first or second, and this year I was third. Everything looked pretty decent during the qualifications before the finals. I really felt well. I was going at the end and met Molina, and he did what he did. He did like 10 out of 10, something like that, or 10 or 9, anyway, something around 10. And my last training I did 10:40, and I was pretty sure I'm going to win. And I didn't. I had my worst static break hold of my life. I don't even remember how much I did. It was like 9:20 or something like that.
Terrible.
Which I knew, which I knew under the water. Like I really know. I knew that it's going to be really, really terrible break hold. I mean, I had food poisoning 2 days before, and I really didn't feel well during the qualifications. I wasn't even able to drive myself to the pool. So a friend of mine drove me because I couldn't drive. I was really sick. And I mean, I did qualification, so I was able to get to the finals. I mean, it's not a problem. But in the finals, I actually felt fine. I was thinking it's going to be fine, but it wasn't. It was really bad. So I mean, it is what it is. I need to talk with my friend who keeps food that's spoiled in his fridge.
Yeah, he owes you. He may not owe you a Range Rover, but he owes you something.
Yeah, and then I was talking with him. I don't know what it was. I mean, it might be food that I ate, and he was like, "Oh yeah, there was some bad chicken in the fridge." Well, lovely.
So any discussion about Visa is, I think, is there is kind of an element of controversy about it, because I think for a long time, the reputation of the Visa competition was, it was very fast and loose on the doping tests. And so I know you mentioned that they've kind of tightened that up in the last couple of years, but like, what is your perspective on that controversy, and how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, doping is kind of a big topic. I mean, it's really a big topic. First of all, people don't understand how a doping procedure looks like and what's everything about. And people think if you do a doping test, then they will know are you doped or not. I mean, which is not the case. Doping test is like buying a car. If you want to do additional tests for additional substances, you need to pay for them. General tests that they're usually doing in freediving, normally it's basically no test at all, because everybody's going to pass that kind of test, because that's not testing for anything. In addition, if you want to test for let's say, I don't know, growth hormone or EPO, erythropoietin or something, or anything that's beneficial for professional athletes, you need to pay extra. Nobody's paying money to do that. Like tests for freediving costs 500 euros. Olympic test that includes everything is up to 3,000 or 4,000 euros. So we obviously don't have that kind of test. So that's the first. Second thing is that if you're not doing random testing, you will never catch no one. I mean, you need to have random testing. Somebody needs to randomly test you at home if you want to be stopped from doing doping. If you know when you're going to have a competition, then you can do whatever you want. That being said, in Croatia, that's the only country that's doing random dopings. And I've been on a random doping test list for the last 5 years. And I've been tested all the time. Usually post pictures on Instagram when they come at home and they test me. They test my blood, test my urine, test everything at least 5 times per year. So that's the proper way to fight against doping. Like if you're tested only at the competition, you know when it's going to be, then you can do whatever you want. You just be going to be clean for the competition. That's all. That's not rocket science. So that's the story about doping in general. It's way more complicated than what people assume it is. It's really complicated. And let's go to Visa competitions. I mean, when people talk about doping, they usually talk about cheating. So if you're doped, you're a cheater. And if you're following the rules of the competition, then you're competing, giving those rules. If the competition is telling you that there is no doping test, you can do whatever you want, then it's the same for everybody. Then everybody is doing whatever they want in order to win. Obviously, you cannot do something if you're on a random doping list. You can't do substances that are banned for under WADA regulations. But if you are not on a random doping list, you can literally do whatever you want. Sky is your limit, literally. So I look at the rules of the competition, and if you're following the rules of the competition, in this case, this is not an official competition. That's just exhibition of the local shape. And he set the rules. If he set the rules, we are doing static naked with the sharks, with whatever, then you follow the rules and you do it. And it's the same for everybody. I have no problems with that. as long as the rules are the same for everybody. But now they have doping tests. Last 3 years, they introduced doping tests. So again, it's the same for everybody. And static times didn't really change. It's still around 10 minutes, 10 plus. So while last year in Malina, both do 10 plus minutes, which is kind of the same what we were doing a bunch of years before. I mean, the results are okay, with the exception of 11 that I did 1 year, but that was kind of an exception. So now they have doping test. It's again same for everybody. We're all following the rules of that doping test, which is again not Olympic doping test, obviously. So I mean, you just follow the rules of the competition, and that's what it is. I mean, for any test in any sport, that's the case. I mean, in freediving, you have a list of specific substances banned for freediving, and you're not allowed to use them. In some other sports, you have different specific substances that you're not allowed to use. So you just look what is written and you follow those rules. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, well, that's cool. Okay, another kind of interesting thing that you did was this world record in O2 static, where you did you had a Guinness World Record. Is the Guinness World Record still holding, or did it get?
No, it was broken. It was first broken by Segura, Alex Segura, another static specialist, and then it was broken by another person from Croatia, actually, within the Shobat.
So, do you want to tell us a little bit about and it's what was it 20? What did you do? 20?
It was 23 minutes. Yeah.
23. Yeah.
Now it's 24, if I'm not mistaken. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't really call that a world record. It's just Guinness record. It's an exhibition, let's call it. I don't know. Once I did it, we had this big event at the main square in the capital of Croatia, in Zagreb, that was broadcasted live during the news at evening, like the main news that we have on national TV. So it was broadcasted live, and there was like a huge audience. And before we even decided what we're gonna do, I mean, we had this pool at the main square, and they asked me what I'm gonna do. Like, let's do a record. I was like, well, we can't do a record. I mean, it's a small pool at the square. What do you want me to do? And then I remember there's O2 Guinness, and I was like, well, but we can do that. Let's try to do that. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't really train seriously for it. I tried like 2 times before the record, and that was it. I mean, it was fun. I think the limit is, if you want to even talk about something as a limit in exhibitions, bread hole. But I think possibility of time in O2 static is much higher. I would reckon close to 40 minutes probably.
I think you were when we were talking about it before. You said there's a trick to it. There's a trick to doing this type of static. Do you mind sharing the secret?
So, you want me to reveal the trick for everyone? No, I mean the trick. I actually, once I did the record again, I realized what's the whole deal about, and that's you really need to hyperventilate as much as possible before a record, which goes against all of these, I don't know, principles of safe freediving, let's call them. But anyway, in O2 static, you just basically hyperventilate as much as possible. Like the more, the better. Like sky is your limit, and then your breath hold really elevates. I don't know why. I guess you're flushing all CO2 from your body, and then you're probably you're saturating even your blood plasma with O2, because you're breathing obviously 100% O2 instead of just 20% that there is available of normal air. So probably has something to do with that. I mean, when I do that in normal static, I don't really do a good static, but with O2, yeah, that's the trick, which is extremely simple if somebody tells you about it, but if you need to figure it out by yourself. For me, that was the last thing I tried here.
Yeah, no, I think it makes total sense, because obviously, the rule against hyperventilation is really, it's really about O2 scarcity. But if you have an unlimited amount of O2, then why not make yourself?
Yeah, one more interesting thing. I mean, I actually did a couple of times. I measured my O2 levels in 20+ minute O2 static. And interesting fact is that your O2 is above 90 still. So you have no issues with O2. There's plenty of O2 available. But the issue is CO2. So CO2 is actually holding you from doing really big breath hold. So O2 is perfectly fine. You have O2 for, I don't know, maybe an hour, but CO2 is a real problem in O2 settings.
Interesting. That is pretty cool. Yeah, so getting back to some of the questions, we have a few more minutes here, so I want to make sure that the audience gets a chance to ask some of the questions they had. One of them, they were talking about Melina. They said that they listened to a webinar with Melina, and he said that in his opinion, there was a big correlation between static and dynamic performances. What do you think about that? Is it?
Well, I don't know from where he's drawing his findings. If he's looking at his personal example or case study, then yeah, he's good at static and dynamic. I'm also good at static and dynamic, but I think if we look at all freedivers that are good at in the pool disciplines, me and Matt are pretty much the only one that are able to do a decent static and dynamic. That being said, when Matt is doing all the disciplines and not just focusing on dynamics, he usually don't do static that's that good. He's usually at around 830. I mean, which is still good, obviously, but when we're talking at Matt, we're talking about Uber. So once he's doing all the disciplines, his static is not that good. But that's the case for me. I mean, overall, we kind of are able to do all the disciplines, but we are the only two. I don't know any other freediver that are able to really combine dynamic and decent static disciplines. So that's that. I mean, I actually read a study years ago about correlation between static and dynamic, and they did find a correlation between those disciplines, but the studies was really limited. I mean, they were looking, freediving at the beginning was not specialist oriented. I know 10 years ago when you had a good pool freediver, he was world champion at everything. And nowadays you really have specific, I mean, specialists per discipline that are doing only one discipline. So if you want to compete at everything, that's not really feasible anymore. I mean, I still try, but competing in all disciplines is yeah, that's ain't going to work anymore. I mean, even Matt is not competing in all disciplines. He usually skips one or even two disciplines. Nowadays I'm the only one doing all disciplines because I'm just refusing to adapt to the new situation. But old school, I guess. But it would be smarter for me as well to just pick 2 or maximum 3 disciplines that I'm going to be doing at Worlds and just stick to that. Doing 4 days of qualifications and then 4 days of finals, that's ludicrous. That ain't going to work anymore.
Yeah. No, that's got to be a pretty big psychological load to be able to manage all of that. Another question. This is an interesting one. They're saying that when they do static, afterwards they have trouble talking and their vocal cord, like they have trouble speaking after, like it seems like their vocal cords are getting damaged or something like that. Any theory on what this particular freediver might be happening?
Who was saying that?
I don't know. It's one of our audience, and unfortunately I can't pronounce their name because looks like Arabic.
I would say he needs to harden up. I don't know. I mean, joking aside, I don't know. I honestly, I never had any experiences with that, and I never heard anybody saying anything about it. So honestly, I wouldn't know.
Yeah, it's Jim Moroulis from Greece. Sorry, I mistook the. So, yeah, I've never heard about that. Well, I've never heard of anything like that either. I guess I would just. I think it might be interesting to know what you're experiencing during your static. Are you having super hard contractions or something like it? But that's an unusual one. I haven't heard of that either. Interesting. Okay. And so another person is asking, what are your go-to lung stretches? What's your favorite lung stretch? Is there one?
I don't really have a favorite one. There's a bunch of stretches that you can do to stretch your lungs. I mean, there's millions of them. And then you just inhale and do all those stretches again, and then inhale and back a little bit and do all those stretches again. I just stretch, basically. You just do stretching, and then you incorporate full inhale and back on top of that. But that's what it is. Whatever you like, you just try to stretch all the areas of your thorax and your lungs. That's pretty much it.
And do you think in the balance between relaxation and lung capacity, is there one that you think is more important than the other? Obviously, they're both important.
No, I would say they're both important. I mean, as I said before, I mean, if you pack a lot and you're extremely uncomfortable during the process of a breath hold, then that's ain't gonna help you. It's better to pack less. But if you're able to pack a lot and still be comfortable during your breath hold, then obviously that's gonna help you. And also, if you're able to stay extremely comfortable, but you're not able to inhale, then that's not good as well. So I don't know, they're equally important, let's say.
Okay, and then in terms of your training preparation, in terms of your equipment choices, I think you do no goggles, no nose clip, right?
Yeah, I do that. I do that for static. For dynamic, I use a nose clip. I also don't use goggles, and for depth, I use nose clip and I don't use goggles. For static, it's just not a nice. Easier because you don't really need to look around. I mean, there's nothing to see. You just float and hold your breath. So you don't need to look, and it's easier. I mean, when I was competing in IDA, when I had the surface protocol where you need to remove all the facial equipment, and it's just easier to not have anything and just show the sign and say I'm okay, and you don't really need to use goggles. I started to do the same thing in dynamic disciplines because when you grab the line up to the surface and then you start removing your goggles, you usually do this motion with your head in order to remove them. And then I would often be dipping my mouth while removing my goggles, not during the competition, but during training. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, well, I just ditch the goggles. I mean, it's going to be simpler to do the protocol and faster and easier. And that's what I did. I started training. For the first week, it was uncomfortable, and then it actually became perfectly comfortable. And I just continued to dive without goggles.
Cool. Final question. Is there any specific foods that you would recommend avoiding to improve static, or foods that harm your static, I guess?
Well, any excessive eating is going to harm your static. But as for any discipline, I would suggest to avoid like hard meat products, like red meat. And obviously, you want to eat a steak and then try to hold your breath. It's going to be terrible. But for different people, it's different. Like the old dogma was to just to eat nuts and be hungry all the time for all the disciplines. And nowadays, we actually see that having a meal before pretty much all pool disciplines and all dead disciplines is beneficial. Like a moderate carbs-rich meal a couple of hours before a dive is always a good thing. Except for static. For static, you want to be kind of hungry a little bit, and you don't want to eat that day, let's say 12 hours before a static hold. You don't really want to eat. That's the best for vast majority of people, and for other disciplines is what I've just said. But again, that's for a majority. Maybe for somebody it's going to be something different. I mean, we're all different.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's about all the time that we have. But so thank you so much for your time, Goran. It's always great talking to you, and really, really cool hearing about some of these fun side competitions that you've done. And yeah, just appreciate you making the time and joining us today.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thank you for having me. I hope the audience was pleased with our chat.
Well, I know I was. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Alisa?
Bye.
Thanks, Goran. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. Thank you, Alisa.
Bye. Thanks, everyone, for listening.